It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSync.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Tyler Robinson. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. Please don't email me. I'm just going to point you to the form. We review those suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Also, join us March 10th for our next Security Weekly Unlock webcast for an intro to KQL queries. To register, visit securityweekly.com/webcast. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, gentlemen, articles for the week. And this first article from HBR, Harvard Business Review, is very aligned to our last segment. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a really appropriate one to start with because it talks about the pressing questions for the board, and it gets into some of these issues around technology and budgets and some of the things we just covered on the last segment. So I thought this would be a really good place to start.
Yeah, I think I want to lead with one of the metrics that concerned me. I mean, I guess it didn't surprise me, but just reading it made me go, holy crap, I definitely am concerned about this. 50% of respondents said that there had been discussions at the board level role, but there was no consensus about what that role should be in cybersecurity. That's scary, don't you think? I mean, number one, only 50% of the respondents said that there's been discussions at the board level, so only half of organizations are talking about this at the board level. But then there's no consensus about what's going on. I mean, what role they should play. That's scary.
I think a lot of that is older boards, right? Like we kind of have that old traditional board members that are prestigious in the community. Maybe they're on other boards in the same vertical or different verticals that are operating together. So kind of that traditional, I wouldn't call it the good old boys club, but a lot of these people are professionals. They've done boards. They know how to operate businesses, but we're kind of in a new era where the board really does have to be on board and understanding what the risks are to the businesses. And probably the biggest risk that they're facing right now is cybersecurity. So you really do need to kind of update that board and what that leadership role entails so that they can make educated decisions around them.
Yeah, 100% agreed.
Yeah, it talks about boards must focus on risk and reputation, business continuity, but they've been approaching it more probably from a financial risk on that side, right? Cybersecurity has a big potential financial risk aspect to it. It has a reputational aspect to it. It has a business continuity aspect to it. It's like you could lose your entire operations due to a ransomware attack. So why aren't you talking about cybersecurity at the board? And why don't you have a consensus on who actually is responsible for it? We've been doing this how long, Jason, right? I mean, you and I have been doing this show together for a couple years now. So I just befuddled that.
Couple three now, my friend. Couple three.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean we're rolling deep here, brother. But it's the same conversation we've been having. But who lights the fire? Somebody needs to light the fire. If the board's not lighting the fire, then the CEO should light the fire. If the CEO is not lighting the fire, the CIO or the CFO should be lighting the fire. Somebody needs to start the conversation. Somebody.
And there's good questions in here to ask too, like running through the list of questions they're asking, the things to consider, why to bring some of this up, like all the way down, like what's the responsibility of the board during an incident? What's our plan? What assets are protecting? What's our layers of protection in place? Like all these things, is our investment enough? All these things are very relevant to the board. And like you said, we need to have that conversation going. So if you haven't started it, excellent article to kind of run through things to get going, having good questions and points to bring up to the next board meeting.
Yeah, exactly right. It makes the statement, we know we can't be 100% secure. We also know we can't mitigate 100% of the risks. It's too expensive, right? This is a risk management discussion. Cybersecurity has to be one of the risks discussed in the board, and you have to set priorities around what things are important, what things aren't, right? But if only 50% are having this conversation, Jason, that means half of all these companies,
right,
they're not even having this conversation, right? And so how are they going to prepare themselves for the next attack that's going to come down? And it's going to be a variation of ransomware. I'm just telling you now, it is.
Yeah, no, it's the unfortunate conversation of it probably won't be a discussion until after an incident.
Right.
That's the unfortunate conversation that's going to happen. Or, like we were saying last week, they're going to come to a crossroads. And that crossroads is going to be, I'm your cyber liability insurance organization, and I just dropped you. Now what? Right? It's going to have to be like an unfortunate circumstance that happens. Either an incident, or they get dropped by insurance, or, hey, they get hit in the pocket, and they have one of their customers say, you failed my third-party vendor risk assessment, you're no longer my partner.
Right.
That is one of the problems, though, right? Is there's that common misconception that cybersecurity and the responsibility and the things that need to take place for cybersecurity is a technology problem. It's 100% not a technology problem. This is a people, processes, and procedures problem that can be directed and should be directed from the top down.
Yeah, and until those business leaders see it as a business imperative, we're not going to get there, right? And it's those hearts and minds that need to be changed. You know, I mean, if a business leader was even just watching the news over the course of the summer, because I want to say it was like Dateline or one of those news shows at night where we had Secretary Mayorkas jump on and say, if you're a business leader and you're not thinking about cybersecurity right now, you are at risk. It is a shall, not a should. That's what came out of his mouth. So if they're paying attention to the news, they need to be putting this at the forefront.
Oh, yeah. So I paired the first article with the second article, which is the 7 mistakes in reporting to the board, because I was curious to see the yin versus yang. Like, do they align? Not quite, right? It was. I
mean, I guess you could work some semantics toward it, right? Because think about it this way, right? Using over technical security language. All right. Well, you're not talking about risk and liability and asset risk and that type of stuff. So yeah, I guess that part aligns, right?
Not a technology problem, right? Like you're back to that.
Yeah. Focusing on the wrong threat impacts. All right. Well, if you don't know what you have and you don't want to know what those risk levels are, right? Know your assets, know what you have, risk rank them, classify them. I think that aligns. I mean, you got to kind of work it, right? You got to kind of work it and try to align them.
Right. The third article I think is better because it aligns to Tyler's point. This is no longer just about technology, if it ever was. This is about protecting business against cyber attacks, which now become a matter of when, not if. This is no longer something you can push down in the organization. And this is this article around time to deal with cybersecurity strategically and from the top down. These first 3 articles have a common theme here on purpose because they align to our previous segment. So I brought them all in here today. I think these are valid points, right? And if the board wants to set directions, they should drive. But if they don't, back to your point, who's going to light the fire? Because if it's not the board, it's not the CEO, then who's going to light the fire? Otherwise, this is not going to get solved, Jason.
It's not. And I mean, there was a comment in there that said, if the board does not see the need or does not feel qualified to step in, right, nothing will change for the good. Well, we have to have business leaders who step up to the plate and Maybe challenge the process, right? Challenge the existing process that we saw 50% of businesses are abiding by right now. Challenge that process and start forcing the conversation to the table.
Yeah. And if you are on a board, like,
it's not hard to come up with some really good stories around the risk. It's really not. Just pay attention.
Right.
Yeah, literally, if you can't come up with a story, you're not trying. But the board, like, it's a fantastic time. If you do not have that visibility, you don't have that expertise in any of your executive staff, like, this is a great time where you have a use case to spin up a role whose primary focus is to evaluate this business risk, which is massive, and bring in someone like a CISO like that, or a BSO, or whatever you're going to call it. But you should have the full support, and you have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure this happens just based on the news and what's going on. So it's a great time to do that if it is not already in place.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And if you have someone who's, seasoned at aligning to the business, they're not going to make those mistakes that were in that other article. They're going to present cybersecurity as a value add to the business versus a cost center, right? They're going to have the conversations around business risk instead of, just the technical conversations. They're not going to come into the, into the boardroom just talking FUD. They're going to talk reality, and they're going to know the business, and they're going to know how to align the risks and really present that good business case as to why it's a shall, right? Like Secretary Morica said, this is a shall. You need to be focusing on this.
I think that's another great point. Is like, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think it was on this show. I've done a few of these, but where do you go to get that training? Like, I think this is a great point that maybe if you're not even seasoned and you're having a hard time finding someone seasoned to do this role, like, you really do have to educate yourself and make sure you're not doing the FUD. You're not making those critical mistakes that you see from a lot of the inexperienced ones, or people who just don't have any idea what's out there, so they just go with the FUD. Those are the things that you really want to avoid. So if you're not there and you're trying to get into this role, train yourself up. Listen to the professionals, listen to people who speak about this well and aren't spreading those kind of things.
That's right. Join us every Monday, because these are the conversations we love to have.
Exactly right. So this next article, Jason, if only 50% are talking about this at the board level, then how many actually have a disaster recovery plan in place when something actually happens? Again, I kind of pull all these together because you see that we're building a theme. But I think about this for a second. Like, if I'm not talking about this at the board and I'm not concerned about it, do I actually know what to do when an attack happens? The answer is probably not. Like, you're probably just flying blind. And this article talks about some of the steps and some of the things you need to do to build a disaster recovery plan for when the day happens. I'm just not sure that many people are actually taking these steps, so I thought it would be a good refresher for some.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that 50% who's not engaged is saying, you know what, the IT department has this. They have a plan. I know they do. They must. They have to. We have an IT department. Of course they do. It's the assumption. It's the assumption that you have an IT team handling this versus business resilience. Resilience across every business unit, where you have stakeholders who have skin in the game, who are going to be part of this. When an incident or an outage or some type of disruption happens, you're going to have a group of people together, and these are the groups that are going to be successful, where you're going to have, folks from every business unit involved. The CFO is going to be involved from, a fiduciary perspective and a budgeting perspective and allocating dollars. You're going to have your marketing and PR people involved from a communication perspective. You're going to have, obviously, IT from a recovery and, that side of the aisle. You're going to have security from a threat hunting and incident response. But it's going to take a group of folks who have a plan collaboratively across the business. And hey, by the way, have the muscle memory because they've practiced.
I was going to say that practice piece is probably the most critical. I'd say less than 5% of even major orgs that are somewhat semi-mature in their security process, like, they may have someone has written down some bullet points and may have like a OneNote or some notes somewhere, but the practice of doing this and going through different tabletop exercises and engaging each of those stakeholders and business entities, not just having them in the plan with a name and a number, like engaging them so that they have time to prepare. What are you going to do? Getting general counsel in, like, what is our legal implication? Who do we have to notify? All of these things have to be practiced, and you have to have a good plan. But again, I would say less than 5%. And if we're talking about 50%, my minimal 5%, that's like what, 2%? So
right. No, I agree, Tyler. And here's the thing, I get folks to get that wide-eyed look and concerned look when I basically say this. I say, listen, picture yourself driving into work, on one early morning, and all of a sudden your cell phone starts just blowing up. Text messages, emails, calls, nonstop, right? You finally get to rip through all these messages, and there's a security incident happening. Are you, it's out there. People know about it. Are you confident enough to know that, an administrative assistant in the finance department isn't going to pick up the phone and the news is on the other line and they're not answering questions the way they shouldn't be? Are you confident enough that would happen, that they know the process and the procedure to guide them to PR or guide them to marketing or guide them to the CISO? Or are they going to, are they going to completely fumble, right? That's where you start having the knowledge of the gap, because that's real. That stuff happens, right? So do you know that you have the communication plans and the knowledge across the board to put your company in a good position if that were to happen?
Right. Again, this isn't a technology problem, right? Like, we come back to the same thing. This is a business processes and procedures. These are the things that actually matter when crap hits the fan. And your ability, I think that's a great scenario, and even a tabletop in and of itself, walking the executive team through this scenario and painting a good picture. This is where your storytelling, your articulation of what actually is happening during these events versus FUD. Yes, there's FUD, but there's also real world events that happen where companies fumble and make a lot of mistakes, and it costs them very dearly. So articulating that well in a good story format and making it personal to each of those people is very important, and it will help drive the conversation forward to something action.
And then they're going to have meaningful conversations with their teams leaving that meeting, right? They're going to have meaningful conversations where they're going to go to their team and they'll say, hey, if something were to ever happen, here's protocol, here's operating procedure, here's communication planning, here's how we handle these type of situations.
Yeah,
it kind of ties into Matt's.
Yeah, we were talking crisis management a few weeks ago, right? I mean, this is part of all the planning, right? Because you never know who's going to get connected on a phone. And you have no idea what they're going to say unless they know what to say or what to do or how to address it. And that is part of this broader crisis management program. And I just, the numbers just scare me from the first article, and then Tyler's numbers, like 2%, actually, like tabletop exercise this, which means, Jason, when you're going into work one day and all the bells and whistles go off, you're like, oh my gosh, who's saying what?
Right. That, at that point, but here's the thing. At that point, if you're practiced, you have the muscle memory, you've done the right things, the worry on your mind is, I hope they followed what they know. That's the hope. Not, oh crap, they don't know what they're doing. It's a different kind of worry, and it's a little bit less anxiety, right? I hope they follow the plan because they've been trained a lot. That's a little bit less anxiety.
Right. And I think this is where it's very, very critical to bring in, maybe outside, maybe inside, but you bring in that offensive mind, that evil mind, to generate through and iterate through each of these scenarios, because I can guarantee you most corporate environments don't think evil enough. What happens if your VoIP server is ransomed? What happened if your administrator or your CEO's phone is compromised as part of the process? Secure communications. How do you get the message out? How do you talk between it? What if everyone's email is compromised? You can't be sending, the incident response team data about where they're at, what they're going to do next. All of these things, you have to get an evil mind in there and iterate through these tabletops to get that disaster, that real disaster scenario, feathered out so that you can do it better.
Yeah. I mean, remember 9/11 and just communications went down. Like, you just have to know that people know what they're doing, because you may not be able to communicate with your employees or anyone, depending on the breadth of the crisis, right? And so, going through these scenarios, like you said, Tyler, like, you got to think like really evil for a couple of these to be like, let's assume, like, there are no cell communications. Like, how are you going to even talk to your executive team, your board, your employees? Like, you got to think about like the old-fashioned ways of getting messages and communications out when telecommunications or other systems could be completely gone.
Yeah, those scenarios are always fun to run.
Yeah, right. And then everybody says, "Oh, it can never happen to us," and then someday it actually happens. So
yeah, right. And then they come give you a big hug when something does happen and it goes off without a hitch, right?
Right, exactly right. This next one, CISO checklist for offboarding security staff. I'm curious, Jason, have you ever had to go through this process? And I'm wondering how accurate this list is.
Yeah, I mean it's really two different scenarios, right? There's the impromptu offboarding that's high priority and it's got to get done fast. But then there's the offboarding of a value add employee that's moving on to their next best thing. And you go through it in a different scenario, right? It's a little bit more at ease from a timeline perspective, right? But it's still the same cycle of offboarding because you want to make sure you're following the same diligence. But it's two different, I would say, timelines and priorities when between the two of them, right? So yeah, I mean this is pretty dead on. I would say some of the gotchas are. Make sure you're following that legacy tech, right? If there's legacy tech in the environment, make sure that you're really doing your quality assurance and due diligence there. That there's no backdoor identities left there that you may not know about, right? Do some level of quality assurance there. And the other one I've seen as a huge gotcha is services dependent on the individual's account. We always say it's best practice to use service accounts and, don't use individual accounts for any type of services within your organization. But, I've seen customers more times than not offboard an employee and then all of a sudden services start failing because they disabled that Active Directory account and they had no idea where it was tied to. So now the business services are down.
That or they never disable that employee's account and the password has to stay the same because they were
the opposite.
Service accounts and leaving that access open for a very long time. You see that all the time. I mean that ownership and there's things that have changed over the years and we've gotten better at doing this in a more meaningful manner that makes sense. But those legacy pieces, there's a lot of persistence, and depending on how you're offloading, like you're still opening yourself up to liability, regardless of whether the employee is malicious and leaving on good terms or not. That liability of, where was that password saved? How was the data stored? Did you remotely wipe the devices? Was there stuff on a phone? How long have they kept this stuff? Do they have like in-home backups? All of these things that people just don't think about. And then you bring in the cloud and SaaS services, the legacy of all the data that lives out there, application passwords, API keys, all of those things really play a key role in making sure you secure that, because they may not intentionally get breached, but maybe they had it on a home computer or a home network and something in their network gets breached that has access to that data. That exposes your environment and they're not even an employee anymore. So you have to think through a lot of this very strategically and very tactically.
Yeah, and again, it's not just the security team or the IT team's responsibility. You have to get HR involved. You have to get the business units involved. You have to get buy-in across the board on here are the proper procedures for offboarding one of the employees in this business unit, right? Because different business units have different applications, different data sets, different cloud apps, and it's you have to build that strategy across all the business units, and it needs to be embedded in the processes that we have. And HR can quarterback that. They really can. They can help quarterback that, so that way we know we're going through the right process at the right time, and we're doing that diligence.
There's a lot of business units that should be involved. I mean, procurement is a great example. They have an idea of all the hardware, all the software that's purchased through the accounts. Making sure that they're involved with HR and yourself, so you have that continual running list of things that need to be identified, and then gain that visibility. Like I always say, trust but verify, and that's common within our industry. So are you checking the logs for those accounts across all of the different applications and devices that were procured? After the cutoff date, are you looking to see what's coming in on the logs? Maybe there's a legacy service out on the cloud somewhere for a dev environment, something that needs to be dealt with, but unless you have that visibility, unless you have that list and you've built that process, you can't do anything with it.
That's right. The importance of knowing what you have, right? If you don't know all of your assets, and assets just aren't hardware. It's not hardware. It's everything. It's your data. It's your applications. It's your, it's the services you get from other organizations. It's your, telecommunications provider, your carriers. Like, know what you have and know who has access to what. Because here's the thing: you get an employee who had some level of authority to call your telco company, right? They can start shutting carrier lines down. That's disruption right there, right? It's not necessarily a technical disruption as far as, they use technology to do it. They used a phone call, and they used their ability to make a decision for the company. And now it becomes a technical issue in an outage scenario.
Authorized names and phones and backup emails. Like, you're right. Those are things that people don't commonly think of. And I will tell you, as an attacker, we will always abuse those things. We will look up those, we'll have those from OSINT, and we will commonly use phone calls to call on those and make, you can spoof that kind of stuff. So having that available and making sure you're shutting that down is a good process.
So I got to tie this back to the first segment, right? If a common goal is to make sure that when I offboard an employee, everything gets offboarded, I better think through the process, the technology and the integration points, and the people side of this, because it is very complex. To your point, right? Lots of legacy systems, lots of different touch points. Did I use service accounts or personal accounts? There's a lot of pieces here. And I don't know if the tools have gotten better. I assume they have over the years, but this still is not a slam dunk when it comes to offboarding anybody, security or not.
We said in the first segment, the tools have gotten better, but adoption hasn't. So, you could like I said, you could have this great tool sitting there, but you adopted 20% of it. Big deal.
Yep, and those integrations may be the point that bites you, or maybe they haven't happened yet, so you're missing visibility. That can go both ways.
Yes, absolutely. Last article, importance of soft skills and technology. I think we know this. I love this sentence. Due to the computer's poor ability to simulate human interaction, social skills remain important. That means I'll have a job for a while.
Right.
It's amazing. I love that.
This is imperative if you want to build relationships, if you want to influence, and if you want to build trust, and you want to be seen as a value add to the organization and not just a cost center and a department of no. This is what we absolutely need, are folks with strong business acumen, soft skills, and customer service focus to be able to elevate the security team outside of just the tech. This is ground floor foundation that's needed.
In fact, if you want to get paid more and you want to be a value add, wherever you go, you will never lose your job because you are that person. You get good at writing. You get good at those soft skills. You get good at understanding business from the top down, understanding the terminology, how money works, how organizational charts work, how decisions and risk is managed, and those decisions are made. That way you can fully understand not just what your job is, but how your job correlates and integrates into the bigger picture. And you'll be invaluable to most places if you can talk that language, integrate, and then think strategically around not just your tech, and not around the people and influencing the people around you, but the entire business as a whole, so that you're making the money, you're getting the return on investment, and you get the capital buy-in from the top down.
Absolutely. The computer will not start hosting Business Security Weekly by itself. That's a good thing. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.